So welcome, Eliot. I'm going to ask you now 35 minutes and I'm going to give you a 5-minute warning, okay?
Thank you, Roger, and welcome to my presentation. A belief is a powerful thing. People live for it, people die for it. People do kind things for it, people kill for it. Individual believers only show allegiance to one of those symbols. They are non-believers in respect to all the others. Consider this. Many supporters of each of those symbols believe that their loyalty earns them a key to the door of an afterlife. The Jews believe they have the right key, the Muslims think it's their key, and the Christians believe it's theirs. They each believe that the other's keys won't fit and that their owners are condemned to burn in hell for eternity. Believers of all faiths seem to be willing to believe that thousands of beliefs are fallacious, with the single exception of their own. Every believer is partisan, and from mankind's viewpoint, that is divisive. We need to ask, why do believers think their belief is the only correct one? Why do millions of other people practice beliefs that are wrong? And why does the supposedly omnipotent God, the one true God, leave the door open for thousands of fraudulent gods? This is a very famous quote. It challenges believers to ask themselves why they don't believe in any of the other gods. Is it because they are made up? Just human fabrications? If so, where does the fabrication stop? How can we distinguish between fact and fabrication? Naturally, with my background in science, I am an example of what is, in the USA, the fastest growing belief sector. The nuns. No, not the ladies in wimples. These sort of nuns. The people who tick the box for no religion. In the USA, the nuns have grown by 25% in the last 5 years. It is particularly fast, the growth, among the young. It's a third of 18 to 29-year-olds. Why is this happening? I contend that it's happening because of education, particularly science education. Non-believers in this bar chart are in blue. You can see that scientists, at 41%, are much more likely to be non-believers than the general public at 4%. In fact, a 1998 survey found that among the members of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the elite scientists, 98% don't believe in a God. There is plenty of evidence that, where there is access to good education, religiosity is much lower than in poorly educated parts of the world. Yes, I know there are those who contend that there is no conflict between science and religion. I disagree. Both science and religion offer explanations for our origins. Their explanations are different. They can't both be correct. That is a source of disagreement which leads to conflict. Faiths, those bastions promising absolutism, have been fighting a rearguard action against scientific progress for centuries and have had to concede much of their old doctrine. 300 years after the event, Pope John Paul II conceded that the Roman Catholic Church had been mistaken to imprison Galileo. The Anglican Church recently apologised for the way they treated Charles Darwin 150 years ago. Pope Benedict abandoned the idea of limbo, saying it was just a theological concept anyway. In other words, he admitted that priests had made it up. It seems that the unchanging Word of God is not as unchangeable as many believers might wish. Meanwhile, scientific method has been steadily eroding ignorance, and although the job is far from finished, it has made some impressive achievements to confirm its effectiveness. There is a flag on the moon. Sadly, some believers imagine they have a right to impose their views on the science community, telling us that we shouldn't be offering abortions, shouldn't be using embryonic stem cells to research for cures for disease, and should be teaching creationism in science lessons. Some believers deny their children life-saving blood transfusions. Some recommend AIDS victims to abandon their medication in favour of prayer. Some cut bits off their children's genitalia. Some deny girls an education, and some even shot Malala Yousafzai in the face as she bravely defied them and went to school. Naturally, I don't want to be associated with any of that. In those scenarios, non-belief has the moral high ground, as I think you must agree. Meanwhile, those who speak out against religious belief sometimes get called cold, hopeless, immoral, unhappy, and purposeless. Those are insults. We are even called fools in the form of a quote. Psalm 14.1 states, "The fool says in his heart there is no God." That's biblically offensive. The antipathy between scientific reality and belief is not surprising, since the remit of all beliefs it's an intrusive one. It's to recruit and convert the entire population of planet Earth by means of missionaries, and to tell people what to think, even to stifle free access to information, to enforce conformity. There are thousands of faiths, sects and cults. They are all convinced of their righteousness, and they all wish to convert everybody. That's a recipe for conflict. We even get Christians fighting Christians and Muslims fighting Muslims. If there was no belief in a God, that couldn't happen, surely. I watch faith-based organisations taking over English state schools with great misgivings. We all know that inducting children when they are young is the way to enslave them. The Jesuits know it. The accelerated Christian educationalists know it. The paedophiles with their grooming techniques know it. All of this grates against my sensibilities. Science teachers want to help people to learn how to think, not to tell them what to think. So, apart from not wanting to take part in the above antisocial activities, which I suspect many of you would agree with me about, why don't I believe? Well, I don't value belief. After all, we can change it on a whim. Muhammad Ali was baptized Cassius Clay. He converted to Islam later, which meant he had to change his name. Tony Blair converted from Protestant to Catholic. It's an inconvenient truth that our beliefs don't matter. We can change them. And if we haven't previously done that, they will die with us anyway. Thousands of gods are already dead from the loss of belief. I could spend all day listing dead gods. Even believers would agree with me about the falseness of all those dead gods. There are thousands more. So, at best, religious beliefs are just personal choices, while at worst, they are ideas that someone else has put into our heads. Abdicated choices. Choices are subjective. Who cares whether, for example, Queen Victoria, it could be anyone, believed sugar made coffee taste nicer? Of course, you can have sugar. It's a free country. But I want to advise you that sugar is bad for you. I've chosen to give up sugar. Many people have given up smoking. And a number of preachers have given up their faith, a growing number. There are even organisations now to help ex-preachers cope with their new circumstances. How can a faith be the one true belief if you can leave it for another faith which also claims to be the one true belief? Some faiths regard quitting to be an offence. Men have been killed for apostasy. And as recently as 1994, the Bishop of Chichester, Eric Kemp, fired Parish Vicar Anthony Freeman for heresy. In other words, for wrong thinking. How Orwellian. Don't you wonder about the validity of belief systems that need such harsh punishments just to retain membership? We should each remember that every one of us is a single person in a total population of about 100 billion humans to have ever existed. Each of us is numerically insignificant. Also, our lives are very short compared to the age of the world, the planet, or the age of the universe. So each of us is insignificant both in terms of number and durability. We are ants. Short-lived ants. But we are ants with delusions of grandeur. The fact that we don't recognise this delusion after thousands of years is an indication of our vaingloriousness, our boastful conceit, our egocentric vanity. We even used to imagine that our world was the centre of the universe, which had been made specifically for us. So I contend that belief is a grossly overrated concept. It's monumentally unimportant because we are unimportant. And belief is not even an indication of truth. Who is this? Bertrand Russell. He had the right idea. So, if belief is unimportant, what about faith? One way to think about faith is like a belief on steroids. Weapons-grade belief. An attempt to persuade oneself that the unimportant has value. Another way to think about faith is like a cheap Easter egg. It comes in quite a strong box. There's gold wrapping. It's got a shell, but inside, nothing. If it had content, faith wouldn't need constantly reasserting. Believers need to worship every week in the same way that a bodybuilder has to keep going to the gym, because without regular exercise, muscles and beliefs simply wither away. Weekly preaching helps to keep the doubts at bay. Did you ever hear a scientist repeatedly asserting that gravity obeys the inverse square law? Of course not. Faith is only necessary in situations where there is no evidence. Believers, seeing this man's quote, they tend to focus on what is to them the anomaly of a scientist revealing that he doesn't believe in science. And they often suggest that he should be sacked. Wrong. The point Professor Hobson is actually making is that science does not require belief. It's based on something much more powerful, evidence. We only need to resort to dubious belief when we have no evidence. That's why he says science is our defense against falling into the trap of belief. A scientist uses the word belief to indicate that we're not sure. I believe this might be the case. Whereas a believer uses it to mean certain knowledge. These are opposite concepts. How can they occupy the same brain at the same time? So, belief is not important. It's just a choice that can be unchosen or forgotten. It's held by unimportant individuals and it dies with us. Furthermore, it is not even synonymous with truth. Beliefs are just ideas inside men's heads. No wonder so many beliefs are now dead. So, if belief is not important, what is? So what is evidence? It's easier to say what it's not. Nullius in verba. That means nothing in words, neither written nor spoken. That's proper skepticism. So, why do we give such unreliable accounts of our unshareable experiences? One reason is because our brains are adapted to recognize patterns. It's a survival advantage. We learn which snakes are poisonous, for example. Unfortunately, we do pattern recognition rather too well. We even imagine we see a face on the moon or on toast. That is an example of cognitive bias. Cognitive biases are tendencies to think in certain ways. They derive from the way we have evolved to think. Making assumptions and jumping to conclusions are human failings. Whenever you catch yourself making a lot out of a little, that's cognitive bias at work. There's a lot of cognitive biases. We are adapted to make hasty judgments. What does this mean? It means that we should not value our beliefs, our choices. They are biased. They are subjective. They are personal. They are just assumptions inside men's heads. Science attempts to eliminate subjectivity by insisting on external, replicable evidence as the only source of information. Who is this? He was a hero of mine. We've got to beware of ourselves. Do you know, if Jesus returned and appeared before me now, I would assume I was either being tricked or I was hallucinating. The probability of those explanations is much greater. And I know my brain does trick me because I see the migraine aura fairly often. What evidence would you accept for the second coming? How would you know that what you were observing was real? What would he look like? We only have artists' impressions after all. How would you distinguish imposters? How would you distinguish illusionists? Here are some more examples of what evidence is not. Testifying is most likely how the tales of the miracles came about. In case you don't remember, Sir Roy Meadows had several mothers convicted of murdering their children on the basis of his, now discredited, hypothesis of Munchausen syndrome by proxy. So what does this mean? It means witnesses are unreliable. Let's deal with books. They are records, not evidence. They can record facts or fiction, or a mixture. Actually, it's probable that all the stories in the ancient world were sexed up in the interests of making a gripping tale. Storytelling was a street performance art then. It earned money, like busking and pavement artistry does today. That's how the gospel stories got told for at least 40 years before being written down, so far as we know. And history books are no better, because history isn't science. It's rarely based on evidence, often only on inference, which is a much lower standard. Nevertheless, all beliefs do depend on an ancient book of doctrines. In some cases, the book is not so old. Here is the Book of Mormon. These books are referred to as scriptures, which just means writings. Using a special word for an ordinary act is an obvious attempt to imbue it with importance and credibility. Why is that necessary? Doesn't it make you suspicious? Capitalizing pronouns is a similar attempt to make claims appear real. What would you say if I wrote about Charles Darwin and gave him a capital H for he and him? Would you think I was trying to big him up? Theologists agree that the Bible is not written as a purely historical or scientific report. It's written in epic style. And the Quran is poetry. However good the historicity of the Bible is, it can only provide evidence of ancient civilizations. It cannot provide evidence that Jesus was the Son of God, or that Yahweh exists, or that there is a heaven. Unless, that is, the archaeology of Athens is considered to be proof of the godliness of Dionysus, and the relics of Rome are proof of the deity of Mithras. To the best of my knowledge, no one tries to argue that case for those gods. Why is that? Is it because no one currently has a vested interest in wishing those gods to be real, or treated as real? So, books are written records, and now we have audio and visual recording techniques. In our law courts, we quite rightly don't accept tape recordings or videos as evidence, because we know they can be tampered with. In order to be acceptable as evidence, closed-circuit television recordings have to be validated. The recording equipment has to be kept securely locked, and everyone handling the recording on its journey to the court has to sign for it to establish a chain of responsibility. This didn't happen to the scriptures. They were passed on by word of mouth. That's a notorious source of Chinese whispers. To become evidence, books need to be verified, which means carrying out some tests. A phone book is easy to verify. Just make a few calls. A science book is easy to verify. Just repeat the experiments described in it. The only aspects of religious books that can be verified are matters of ancient geography and, to a lesser extent, ancient history. Archaeological ruins can be repeatedly observed, but tales of miracles or supernatural deities cannot be repeatedly observed, cannot be tested, and cannot be verified. Supernatural tales must forever remain nothing more than unverifiable anecdotes. That's the whole point of them. By being outside the natural realm, they conveniently evade scrutiny. Who is this? You won't be surprised to hear that I agree with him. So, if experience and testimony and books are not evidence, what is? So, what are repeatable observations? Well, you may ask that. It's getting the same result repeatedly. I can do an experiment today and again tomorrow. Repeat it. You can watch the experiment with me, we can both take notes, and then we can compare notes. 2 observations. It's a repetition. You can observe a star from Bristol, and I can observe it from Littlehampton. Or I can observe it with visible light and with X-rays. All of these, and combinations of them, are all types of repeatable observations. Anything else is not evidence. Some will claim that observations are unsatisfactory because they have to be interpreted. It's true that when optics was in its infancy, men did look through telescopes and imagined they saw canals on Mars. But that's in the past. Most observations today are made by instruments, and the output is digital, so it can be statistically assessed. And couldn't I allege that scriptures really do need to be interpreted? Isn't that what theologists try to do all day? Sadly, if something is not replicable, there is no satisfactory evidence that it ever happened. Do you remember Fleischmann and Pons? They claimed they had achieved cold fusion, and they committed the sin of revealing at a press conference before their paper had been reviewed by other experts. Nobody else could repeat their results. Their reputations are rubbish now. They were bad scientists. This is why science has a peer review system. It's self-critical. I'm not claiming that it's perfect, just that its target is perfection. Scientists don't make the naive assumption that ancient writings must be true. In fact, early claims, like the canals on Mars, have later been shown to be false. Scientists even challenge the perceived wisdom. There are no scientific sacred cows. On the subject of cows, here's an analogy. You put food into a cow, it digests it, stuff which passes the digestion process becomes the product, stuff which fails the digestion process becomes the waste. Some things cannot even enter the digestion process. Poisonous food may be regurgitated. The scientific method cow. This time, the input is tested. Stuff that passes the testing process becomes the product. Stuff which fails the testing process stays as propositions which lack evidence. And some things cannot even go through the testing process. supernatural things, souls, angels, gods, heavens. They are outside the realm of reality. Isn't that convenient? Isn't that suspicious? Don't you think that postulating a supernatural being in a supernatural realm is a clever attempt to place the burden of proof on the denier, when it rightfully belongs with the proposer?
5 minutes.
Some may claim that the testing process itself needs to be believed in, that we must have faith in the effectiveness of our method. I disagree. The efficacy of a cow is evidential. We can drink the milk, we can make it into cheese. We can breed the cow and get another milker. Every so often a cow will be born with 2 heads. You don't need faith that this will happen. It's a statistical probability. That's a level of confidence, which is not the same as faith. Similarly, the efficacy of scientific method is evidential. We can share the new facts. We can make them into products. A smartphone that can remotely control a laptop. We do not need to believe evidential things. The efficacy of scientific method is evidential. It works. Some believers, in an attempt to reduce science to the lowly state of unevidenced belief in gods, try to challenge science on the grounds of the impossibility of externally validating science's foundational principles such as inductance and logic. Interestingly, by trying to demote science to the level of unevidenced beliefs, they are revealing the weakness of their own position. In fact, evidence supersedes any presuppositions that were put in place during the investigation stage. Put a hypothesis or a presupposition into an investigation, and evidence is either collected or it's not. Once evidence has been discovered, any initial assumptions have become redundant. Furthermore, once evidence has been discovered, we have a fact, and belief is no longer necessary. Think what this means. If there was evidence that God existed, we would not have to believe in her. She would have the same status as gravity. She would be an evidential reality. The very fact that belief is required for gods casts doubt on their existence. So, God suggests claims, extraordinary claims, the sort that require extraordinary evidence. Would you base your worldview on a claim? Why? Isn't it a mistake to consider guesses and claims or hypotheses to be endpoints or conclusions? Isn't that exactly like a Viking father telling his inquisitive children that thunder is caused by Thor doing a bit of hammering in the sky? It comes down to the difference between how we consider doubt and reality and certainty. Heavy weight of evidence, and still the scientist is having doubts. Over here, we have a believer worshipping. He's expressing groundless certainty. Scientists recognise that nothing is certain. All scientific facts are provisional, permanently up for review. That's how Einstein was able to improve upon Newton. Don't imagine that a layman can discredit science by spotting the flaw in the Big Bang Theory. Scientists are already trying to do that. That's their job. They can find flaws far better than any layman. That's exactly how science progresses. Almost the last night. Meanwhile, according to believers, God supposedly loves us and is all-powerful. But where is she when we need her? The Pakistani floods made 6 million homeless. The Haitian earthquake made 230,000 dead. If God missed one disaster, we might forgive her. But to miss them all is unforgivable. And God moves in mysterious ways is not a credible explanation for the failures of a supposedly loving deity. My worldview. We have mountains of knowledge, thanks to scientific method. Scientists still have plenty of work to do cutting back the forest at the frontiers of ignorance. But we have the best, indeed the only tool for discovering information, scientific method. Or you can opt for the belief system route. Radio 4. God is still missing, has always been missing. Who is this? Neil deGrasse Tyson. He says, I agree. Ignorance is just ignorance. It doesn't mean God done it. It's not evidence. Who is this? Thank you. I've got one more slide which summarises. Thank you. Some of you will reject what I've just said. It's been a lot to take on board. You'll reject it as just my opinion. But the truth is, it's the opinion of a growing number of people, as I showed at the start. So, I'm a non-believer because belief has no value. There is no evidence for any God or anything supernatural. There is no evidence for any humanitarian works done by a supposedly all-powerful and loving God. And I deplore much of the human activity that is done in the name of gods. This doesn't mean that I hate your God. I don't hate Zeus either. Isn't it pointless to have an attitude towards something that is yet to be shown to exist? Also, it doesn't mean that I'm immoral, empty, cold, unhappy, lost, futile, or purposeless. That's just insulting prejudice. Let's face it, this is the 21st century. We know what works, and it's not belief, it's evidence. Thank you.
Thank you. A couple of minutes turnaround break.